Ever feel like you're in a debate and the other person's logic just seems off? Like their conclusion just kind of came out of thin air.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, well, you're not alone. Today, we're diving into the world of arguments.
Oh, fun.
Specifically, the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning.
Okay.
By the end of this deep dive, you'll be able to spot these argument types in the wild and maybe even sharpen your own reasoning skills.
I like it.
So where do we even begin with this whole logic thing?
Well, the foundation of any argument is a proposition.
Okay.
A statement that can be true or false.
Just like the sky is blue would be a proposition.
Exactly. It's a statement that we can determine to be either true or false.
Okay.
But something like, go clean your room,
right,
wouldn't count.
Got it. So propositions are the building blocks.
They are.
We use those to build arguments.
Right. An argument is essentially a series of propositions where some called premises are meant to support or provide evidence for another proposition.
It's called the conclusion.
This is making sense.
Good.
But I feel like I've seen arguments where the connection between the premises and the conclusion is kind of murky.
Yeah.
Like you're left wondering, how did they get from A to B?
You've just stumbled upon a common rhetorical tactic called an enthymeme.
Enthymeme.
It's an argument where one or more premises are left unstated.
Okay.
Often because the speaker assumes the audience already accepts them.
So it's kind of a sneaky way to slip in assumptions without making them explicit.
Exactly. Like in your source material where someone says, Ben McMahon has more experience, I rest my case.
Okay.
The unstated premise is that experience is a desirable quality in a leader, and therefore we should vote for McMahon.
Okay. That's definitely a tactic I've seen used before.
For sure.
And I bet it's especially effective in emotionally charged situations where people might not be thinking as critically.
Absolutely. Emotion can easily cloud our judgment and make us more susceptible to accepting weak or incomplete arguments.
Right. But that's where understanding the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning comes in handy.
Right. Let's get to the heart of it. What exactly is the difference between these two types of arguments?
Deductive arguments aim for certainty.
Yep.
The idea is that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must also be true.
Okay.
There's no room for doubt or probability.
So it's like a logical chain reaction. If A leads to B and B leads to C, then A must inevitably lead to C.
Precisely. One of your sources provides a classic example. All dogs are mammals. All poodles are dogs. Therefore, all poodles are mammals.
Right.
If those first two statements are true, then there's no way the conclusion can be false.
That's super clear. So what about inductive arguments? How are they different?
Inductive arguments are based on probability rather than certainty.
Okay.
The conclusion is supported by the premises, but not guaranteed to be true.
So even if the premises are rock solid, the conclusion could still be shaky.
Exactly. Here's an example from your sources. Most economists agree that government spending in the current climate would boost GDP.
Okay.
Even if it's true that most economists agree, there's still a chance they could be wrong about the outcome.
This is really helpful. So deductive arguments are like those airtight cases where the conclusion is undeniable.
Yes.
While inductive arguments are more about weighing the evidence and judging the likelihood of the conclusion.
You've got it. And understanding this difference is crucial because it affects how we evaluate each type of argument.
This is definitely making me think more critically about the arguments I encounter every day. I'm ready to put on my logic detective hat.
I love it. It's like you've unlocked a secret level of critical thinking. But here's the thing. Arguments in the real world are rarely presented in such a neat and tidy way.
You're telling me it's more like trying to untangle a knot of claims and assumptions.
Exactly. And that's where understanding how to explicate an argument becomes so valuable.
Explicate? Is that like some fancy logic term?
Yeah. It's actually simpler than it sounds. Explication is the process of taking an argument, especially one with hidden premises like those end themes we talked about, and laying out all its parts in a clear and organized way.
So it's like taking a messy paragraph and turning it into a well-structured argument with each premise and the conclusion clearly labeled.
Precisely. By doing this, you can see if the conclusion truly follows from the premises or if there are any weak links in the chain of reasoning.
It's like becoming an argument detective searching for those hidden clues. I can see how this would be super helpful in everyday life. Imagine being able to deconstruct those political speeches or those clickbait headlines we see all the time.
Absolutely. And once you start explicating arguments, you'll notice certain words or phrases that often signal the presence of a premise or a conclusion.
You mean like those little linguistic breadcrumbs that lead us to the heart of the argument? What are some examples?
Well, conclusion indicators like therefore, hence, or thus often point towards the main claim the arguer is trying to make. And premise indicators like because, for, or as often introduce the reasons supporting that claim.
This is like having a cheat sheet for understanding arguments.
Yeah.
But even with these indicator words, I imagine it can still get tricky to decipher what's really going on.
You're right. Context is key. The same word can function differently depending on whether the passage is an argument or an explanation.
Wait, there's a difference between an argument and an explanation.
There is. While both involve presenting information, their purposes are distinct.
Huh.
An argument aims to persuade you to accept a certain claim, while an explanation seeks to clarify or inform about something that's already accepted as true.
Okay, I need an example to wrap my head around this.
Consider the statement, the sky appears blue because of the way light is refracted by the atmosphere. This is an explanation.
Yeah.
It's clarifying a phenomenon we already accept as true.
So no one's trying to convince me that the sky is actually green or purple.
Exactly. But if someone were to say, we need to reduce carbon emissions because climate change is a real and pressing threat,
Right.
that's an argument. They're presenting a reason, the threat of climate change, to support the claim that we need to reduce emissions.
So in an argument, there's always that element of persuasion, trying to convince the audience of something they might not already believe.
Precisely. And as you become more adept at recognizing the difference between arguments and explanations, you'll also start to notice those sneaky errors in reasoning that can trip us up.
You mean like those logical fallacies, the ones that make you cringe when you hear them?
You got it. Fallacies are those common mistakes in reasoning that can make an argument seem persuasive even though it's logically flawed.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some common examples of these fallacies that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, there's the ad hominem fallacy, where someone attacks the person making the argument instead of addressing the argument itself.
Oh, classic. Like saying, you can't trust anything she says, she's a terrible dresser. Totally irrelevant to the actual argument.
Exactly. It's a distraction tactic. Then there's the straw man fallacy, where someone misrepresents their opponent's argument to make it easier to attack.
It's like setting up a flimsy scarecrow and then pretending you've defeated a mighty warrior. So dishonest.
And we can't forget the ever-popular appeal to emotion fallacy, where someone tries to manipulate your feelings to win you over instead of presenting solid evidence.
The classic tactic of tugging at our heartstrings instead of appealing to our brains. I'm starting to see how these fallacies can be so sneaky, especially when they're disguised in clever language.
That's why it's crucial to develop those sharp logical thinking skills so you can see through these rhetorical tricks and get to the core of the argument.
It's like having a mental shield to deflect those faulty arguments.
Now, you might be wondering, why should you even care about all this logic stuff?
Yeah.
How does it actually apply to your life?
It's a valid question. It all sounds very intellectual and academic, but how does it translate to real-world situations?
Well, think about it. We encounter arguments every single day, whether we're reading news articles, scrolling through social media, or having discussions with friends and family.
It's true. Arguments are everywhere, from those heated political debates to those friendly disagreements about which pizza topping reigns supreme.
Exactly. By understanding the principles of logic, you can become a more informed citizen, a more critical thinker, and a more persuasive communicator.
So it's not just about winning arguments. It's about engaging in more meaningful and productive conversations.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's about being able to analyze information, to identify biases, and to form your own well-supported opinions.
It's like upgrading your mental operating system. No more blindly accepting claims, but actually evaluating them for yourself.
Now let's shift gears a bit and delve deeper into a concept that's often misused and misunderstood: the idea of truth.
Truth, the elusive concept that philosophers have been grappling with for centuries. I'm all ears.
Well, in logic, we're not so much concerned with ultimate truth with a capital T, but rather with the truth of propositions within a specific argument. Remember, a proposition is a statement that can be either true or false.
Okay, so we're talking about lowercase t and truth here.
Yes.
The truth of the specific claims being made within an argument.
Exactly. And the truth of those premises is crucial for determining the soundness of a deductive argument.
Right. Even if the argument structure is perfect, if one of the premises is false, the whole thing falls apart.
Precisely. And that's where critical thinking comes in. We need to be able to assess the truth of those premises before accepting the conclusion.
It's like checking the foundation of a house before you move in.
A great analogy. Now, with inductive arguments, the truth of the premises contributes to the strength of the argument. But remember, it doesn't guarantee the truth of the conclusion.
So even if the premises are true, there's still a chance the conclusion could be false.
Yeah.
Right? Because inductive reasoning deals with probability, not certainty.
That's right. It's like judging the likelihood of rain based on the cloud cover. Even if the clouds look ominous, there's still a chance they might pass without a drop.
Okay. I'm starting to see how tricky this whole truth thing can be.
It is. And that's why it's so important to be aware of the sneaky rhetorical tricks that sometimes masquerade as evidence.
Oh, those crafty tactics that try to make a weak argument seem more convincing. I'm ready to expose them.
Well, one common tactic is the appeal to authority fallacy.
Okay.
It's where someone tries to support their claim by citing an expert or a famous figure, even if that person isn't actually an authority on the topic at hand.
It's like saying, well, my favorite celebrity uses this brand of toothpaste, so it must be the best. Just because someone is famous doesn't make them an expert on everything.
Exactly. We need to evaluate the source of the information, not just blindly accept it because it comes from someone with a big name.
I'm starting to see how important it is to be skeptical and not just take things at face value.
Right. Another sneaky trick is the bandwagon fallacy, which plays on our desire to fit in and be part of the group.
It's the idea that something must be true or good simply because a lot of people believe it or do it.
It's like saying, everyone's jumping off this bridge, so I should too. Clearly not the best way to make decisions.
Indeed. Popularity doesn't equal truth. And then there's the appeal to tradition fallacy, where someone argues that something must be right or good because it's been done that way for a long time.
It's the "we've always done it this way" argument. But just because something's been done a certain way for years doesn't mean it's the best or most effective way.
You're absolutely right. Traditions can be valuable, but they shouldn't be blindly followed without considering if there might be better alternatives.
It's like questioning those age-old recipes. Maybe there's a way to make Grandma's famous apple pie even more delicious. Or maybe it's time for a whole new recipe.
Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question.
Ooh, love a good brain teaser. Hit me with it. Considering all we've discussed about logic, evidence, and truth, how can you apply these principles to become a more discerning consumer of information in your own life?
That's a great question. It's like a challenge to put all this newfound knowledge into practice. I'm ready to start analyzing arguments like a pro.
Yeah, I feel like we've really been handed this amazing toolkit, for critical thinking.
For sure.
It's time to put it to use.
Yeah. And remember, this is just the beginning. The journey of knowledge is never truly over.
Right.
There's always more to learn, more perspectives to consider, and yes, more arguments to analyze.
Speaking of arguments, let's circle back to the stars of the show. Deductive and inductive reasoning. We touched on them earlier, but I think a little recap would be helpful. What are the key differences between the two again?
Great point. Let's solidify those distinctions. So deductive arguments, as we discussed, aim for absolute certainty. If your premises are true, your conclusion must logically follow. Think of it like a watertight container.
No room for leaks or alternative interpretations.
So no wiggle room for opinions or personal interpretations.
Not when it comes to the structure of a deductive argument. The conclusion flows directly from the premises. It's like a mathematical equation. Follow the rules, and you'll always arrive at the correct answer.
Okay, that makes sense. So if I have a deductive argument,
yes,
and I know my premises are true, I can be 100% confident in my conclusion.
Precisely. Now, with inductive arguments, things get a bit more nuanced.
Okay.
Remember, these arguments deal in probability, not certainty. Even with strong evidence, there's still a possibility that your conclusion could be wrong.
So it's like those weather forecasts that say there's an 80% chance of rain, but then the sun ends up shining all day.
A perfect example. Inductive arguments are based on observations, patterns, and generalizations, but they don't offer that ironclad guarantee that deductive arguments do.
This distinction is really important because it affects how we evaluate each type of argument, right?
Exactly. With deductive arguments, we look for validity, meaning the conclusion logically follows from the premises. And we also check for soundness, meaning the premises themselves are actually true.
So a deductive argument can be perfectly structured, but if it relies on false information, it's still not a sound argument.
That's right. It's like following a recipe to the letter, but using spoiled ingredients.
Oh, yeah.
The end result won't be what you expected.
Right. And how do we evaluate inductive arguments?
With inductive arguments, we assess their strength,
Right.
how well the premises support the conclusion. A strong inductive argument provides compelling evidence to support its claim, making the conclusion highly probable.
So it's like a courtroom trial. The more convincing the evidence,
Exactly.
the stronger the case.
Precisely. And this is where critical thinking really comes into play.
Yeah.
We need to be able to weigh the evidence, consider alternative explanations, and assess the overall strength of the argument before accepting the conclusion.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of how arguments work.
Good.
And more importantly, how to analyze them effectively.
Excellent.
And remember, dear listeners, next time you find yourself in debate, remember what we've learned today. Ask yourself, what type of argument is being presented?
Right.
Are the premises true? Does the conclusion logically follow? And most importantly, don't be afraid to challenge those shaky claims.
Yeah.
And demand better reasoning. Until next time, keep those minds sharp.
Yes.
And those arguments strong.